faithfully delivering value, interpreting great global books. Hello, this is Sally Book Talk. Today, I'm going to interpret this book called Empire's Crossroads for you. From Columbus to Today, Caribbean History is authored by British historian and Caribbean researcher Callie Gibson. Between North and South America lies a vast and enchanting sea area. The Caribbean Sea, bordered by the Gulf of Mexico to the west and the Atlantic Ocean to the east, covers about 2.75 million square kilometers. The region is dotted with islands, including four major ones: Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, Puerto Rico, plus a chain of archipelagos. People living on these islands share common traits, yet each has unique characteristics. In the Caribbean region, you can hear Spanish, French, Dutch, English, making it seem like you're in Europe. But you might feel a bit weird because the locals' languages aren't pure. They're mixed with a lot of indigenous dialects. So, a typical Caribbean person might speak Spanish influenced by indigenous languages, or French mixed with African dialects, or English with Indian dialects. This shows that the Caribbean is a region where various ethnicities and cultures blend, with immense internal diversity. It's hard to sum it up in one or two words. For example, in 2001, Nobel Prize winner V.S. Naipaul was born in Trinidad and Tobago in the Southern Caribbean. His family was of Indian descent. He grew up there, enrolled at Oxford University in England at 19, and has always written in English. His works include the India Trilogy, America's Trilogy, etc., combining Caribbean, Indian, and British backgrounds into a unique style. It can be said that Naipaul's experiences are a microcosm of Caribbean history and culture. So, how did this region evolve into what it is today? The book Empire's Crossroads, we're discussing next, authored by the Caribbean historian, outlines the Caribbean's 5-century development from the age of exploration to now, with blood, tears, and sweat intertwined into a tragic epic. I'll divide it into 4 parts to discuss this book. Part 1. Columbus arrives. The Spanish Empire conquers the West Indies. Part 2. Colonial blood and tears, sugar, plantations, and the slave trade. Part 3. Slave resistance, the abolition movement, the Haitian Revolution, and the American Wars of Independence. Part 4. The backyard under America's shadow, the Cold War, and the tourist paradise. All right, let's get started. Part 1. Columbus arrives, the Spanish Empire conquers the West Indies. On August 3rd, 1492, a Spanish fleet sailed out of the Mediterranean into the vast Atlantic Ocean. After more than 2 months of voyage, the fleet approached a small island. Captain Columbus led the crew ashore, planted a flag representing the Spanish monarchy on the beach, and immediately declared the island San Salvador, belonging to the King of Spain. This was Columbus's first arrival in the Caribbean Sea. In subsequent voyages, Columbus also discovered present-day Cuba, Haiti, and others, and named them according to Spanish customs. For example, he called Cuba Isla Juana after Princess Juana of Spain. St. Vincent Island was named after a priest. Haiti was called Santo Domingo, meaning Holy Sunday, because the day Spaniards began building a city there happened to be a Sunday. From a modern perspective, this voyage held extraordinary significance. As we know, these islands are very close to the American mainland. Cuba is just 145 kilometers from Florida, reachable by canoe, and, in fact, the 16th century Spanish Empire used Cuba as a base to invade North America, a foundation laid by Columbus. Thus, Columbus is generally credited with opening the European discovery and conquest of the New World. Of course, this is hindsight. Columbus himself wasn't pleased at the time. Why? His goal was reaching India to bring back immense wealth. With this promise, the Spanish king funded his fleet and granted him the title of admiral. Yet the reality differed vastly from legendary India overflowing with silk and gold. Santo Domingo natives wore no clothes, barely covering themselves with leaves. Columbus saw no fabric anywhere, hardly a silk-producing region. He barely secured a few gold nuggets, some tropical produce, parrots, and captured natives for the return voyage. Such meager returns clearly couldn't convince the Spanish king he'd found India, yet Columbus stubbornly insisted until death that it was indeed India. He collectively named the Caribbean islands the West Indies, revealing his fixation. Even so, this India wasn't the real India, but Spanish adventurers still followed Columbus's footsteps to those islands. One key reason was that Portugal and Spain, as pioneers of the age of exploration, signed a treaty in the late 15th century, mediated by the Pope, dividing spheres of influence along a meridian running from pole to pole. And east of the meridian went to Portugal, west to Spain. This became the famous Papal Meridian, which defined the expansion directions for both nations. From then on, Portugal pushed eastward, eventually reaching India by sailing around Africa, while Spain crossed the Atlantic, seeking new horizons. 1502. Spain established settlements in Santo Domingo, today's Haiti, in 1502, occupied Puerto Rico in 1508, Jamaica in 1509, and Cuba in 1511. Thus, Spain created colonies on all four major Caribbean islands, the beginning of its global empire and the start of disaster for Native Americans. Before Columbus, millions of natives inhabited the Americas, using canoes to populate Caribbean islands. Island populations ranged from thousands to tens of thousands, with diverse ethnicities, languages, and tribes. Yet Spaniards indiscriminately called them all Indians. This showed colonialists had zero interest in local history or culture. They only sought profit and wealth, showing no mercy even if it meant destroying entire civilizations. This was closely tied to Spain's colonial policy. The Spanish crown didn't colonize directly, but made agreements with private adventurers. These adventurers went to America with royal licenses to conquer territories, keeping most profits after giving the crown its share. This massively fueled their greed, driving them madly toward the Caribbean seeking fortune. Two men epitomized this, Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro. In 1511, Cortés participated in Spain's conquest of Cuba. There, he heard about the Aztec Empire in Mexico, with mountains of gold filling their storehouses. In 1529, Cortés sailed from Cuba, landed on Mexico's east coast, and within just 9 months captured the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, plundering vast treasures. Over a decade later, another Spanish adventurer, Pizarro, invaded the mighty Inca Empire in South America. With minimal forces and in a short time, he conquered this indigenous empire. Think about it. Cortés and Pizarro had at most 1,000 men, facing vast, populous empires. But what happened? The Spaniards crushed them like dry twigs. How'd they do it? The answer: guns and organization. Spanish soldiers had firearms and cannons, plus rigorous training in modern warfare tactics, while Native Americans still used stones and spears with primitive combat methods. This huge gap in weapons and military organization let a few hundred Spaniards easily defeat thousands of indigenous warriors. Cortés and Pizarro's success showed Native Americans couldn't fight back against modern equipped Spaniards, fueling more adventurers' ambitions.
Some went north from Cuba via Florida, whose name comes from Spanish Florida, meaning flowery, to establish colonies.
Others sailed south along Caribbean islands, seizing St. John, St. George, Trinidad, and Tobago, reaching Venezuela by mid-16th century. By then, the Spanish Empire had colonies across most of the Americas governed by viceroys. Throughout this, the Caribbean served as a stepping stone. Conquistadors' playbook first established bases in Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, then jumped to other islands or mainland, but their colonization methods were brutally cruel. Wherever Spaniards went, natives' lands were stolen, possessions looted, and entire tribes massacred. Even some conscientious Spaniards couldn't bear these scenes. In 1542, Father Bartolomé de las Casas, after 30 years in Cuba, presented a short account of the destruction of the Indies to the Spanish king. His records describe Spaniards storming villages, burning and killing indiscriminately, even children, elders, pregnant women.
They sliced open pregnant bellies, hacked babies to death like lambs, and bet on who could gut a man with one slash.
Casas witnessed with his own eyes that the once rich and beautiful Cuba, Jamaica, and Santo Domingo had become ruins, with almost no indigenous people left. According to his records, from 1502 to 1542, over 12 million indigenous people died tragically. Casas described the colonizers as inhuman and wolf-like in cruelty. He pleaded with the Spanish king to rein in these lawless adventurers. Casas died of illness in Madrid in 1566, passing with resentment and regret because, faced with enormous profits, the Spanish king turned a deaf ear to his humanitarian appeals. Meanwhile, European powers like France, the Netherlands, and England also coveted America's wealth and came to colonize, intensifying the suffering in the West Indies. Part 2. Colonial Blood and Tears. Silver Mines, Pirates, and the Slave Trade. I'll now recount this history intertwined with wealth and brutality. In the mid-16th century, Spaniards discovered rich silver deposits in Mexico, North America, and Bolivia, South America, immediately mining and shipping it back to Spain, and some form remains incomplete. During Philip II's reign, American silver accounted for over 50% of the global market, becoming the true silver capital. So to transport the silver, Philip II organized specialized fleets. Each spring, a large convoy loaded with European goods like olive oil, wine, and cloth would depart from Seville, cross the Atlantic, and head for Havana, Cuba. The fleet would then split. The first group sailed west to Mexico, sold goods, loaded silver, and returned to Havana. The second went south to Panama, where sailors sold goods while waiting for mule trains carrying silver to arrive. This could take months. After receiving silver, this fleet sailed north to Havana to reunite with the first before returning to Spain. Thus, the Caribbean region, centered on Havana, became the trade hub connecting the Americas and Europe. Through this hub, Spain continuously extracted American silver, greatly boosting its power. Philip II funded the Invincible Armada, defeating France, the Netherlands, the Ottoman Empire, and conquering Portugal. Its colonies spanned Asia, Africa, and Latin America, making Spain effectively the first empire where the sun never set. This naturally aroused envy. Other European nations, unwilling to accept Spain's American monopoly, also reached out, but fearing Spain's military might, avoided open conflict and turned to piracy.
Suddenly, adventurers from Britain, France, Netherlands, Denmark, secretly backed by their nations, became pirates robbing Spanish fleets and colonies, turning the Caribbean into a piracy hotspot. The most notorious was Francis Drake.
Born in England, he was originally an explorer who circumnavigated the globe twice. In 1581, Queen Elizabeth I knighted Drake and ordered him to lead fleets in large-scale raids against Spanish merchant ships and colonies in the Caribbean. Well, in 1586, Drake razed Santo Domingo's port, then attacked St. Augustine in Florida, burning the city to ashes.
Drake moved unpredictably. Spanish forces could never catch him.
Furious, Philip II retaliated against Britain. In 1588, the Spanish Armada crossed the English Channel but met a massive storm. Combined with British resistance, the entire fleet was destroyed. And after this, Spain weakened drastically. Unable to dominate the Americas alone, European powers swarmed in, reshaping Caribbean power dynamics. This Spain retained Cuba, Puerto Rico, and eastern Santo Domingo, while western Santo Domingo went to France. The French split. One group headed north, colonizing via the southern U.S. and Canada. The other seized Guyana. Britain took Jamaica, Cayman Islands as footholds, while Netherlands, Denmark partitioned the West Indies. Thus, the Spanish, British, and French empires converged in the Caribbean, a rare global crossroads inspiring the book's title, Empire's Crossroads.
Meanwhile, Caribbean trade boomed thanks to cash crops like tobacco, coffee, and sugarcane.
First, tobacco. Native to the Americas, indigenous people used it medicinally, for energy, recreation, and religious rituals. They believed deities loved its scent. Spaniards discovered this wonder crop upon arrival, took it to Europe, and it spread like wildfire. Spain and France tried growing it but failed. Tobacco thrived best in American climates and soil. In 1607, the British grew tobacco in Virginia, North America, then in Bermuda, north of the Caribbean, but neither matched Spanish colonies.
Cuba!
Cuba's mineral-rich red soil provides ideal conditions for tobacco cultivation. Cuban tobacco has intense aroma. When made into cigars, it's considered premium and beloved by high society. To this day, tobacco and cigars remain vital Cuban industries. Now about coffee. Originating in Ethiopia, Africa, it reached Europe in the 16th century and gained popularity. By mid-17th century, cafes dotted cities like London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Venice. The French brought beans to the Caribbean, finding perfect growing conditions. Thus, coffee plantations spread across Caribbean islands, especially Jamaica's Blue Mountains, famous for unique flavored coffee. But profit-wise, neither tobacco nor coffee could compete with another cash crop.
Sugarcane originated in Papua New Guinea's grasslands. Locals chewed it for energy. Through Southeast Asian trade, it reached Asia, where sugar extraction techniques developed.
In the 7th century, Arabs obtained sugarcane from Persia and introduced it to the Mediterranean. Europeans learned to refine sugar from sugarcane. Problem was, sugarcane needs abundant water, but Mediterranean summers are hot and dry, often killing the plants. Low yields meant high prices, making sugar affordable only for royalty and the wealthy. Colonists discovered the Caribbean's intense sunlight, abundant rain, and fertile soil were perfect for sugarcane. So Europeans crossed oceans to establish Caribbean sugarcane plantations, seeking fortunes. Take Barbados. This tiny eastern Caribbean island was uninhabited. In 1620, the British landed and built sugarcane plantations. Barbados sugar soon sold across Europe, making planters enormously wealthy. Records show in 1681, British merchants earned £1,000 profit for every £5,000 invested, a 20% return. A 20% return. Profit-driven planters engaged in rampant deforestation across Barbados. They converted 80% of the island into sugarcane fields, with similar patterns elsewhere. From Cuba, Jamaica to southern North America, wherever sugarcane could grow, plantations dominated. By late 17th century, the Americas produced over 60% of global sugar, enriching European powers like Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands. But colonists' profits rested on the dark foundation of slavery.
Actually, when dominating the Americas, Spaniards trafficked African slaves for silver mining. Then with tobacco, coffee, or sugarcane booms, labor shortages worsened.
So Britain, France, and others massively purchased slaves too. In the late 17th century, about 460,000 Africans were sold into the Caribbean. And as sugar trade boomed, colonists intensified their brutal practices. In 1700 alone, Britain transported over 400,000 slaves from Africa. Seeing profits, many Europeans became traffickers. The Dutch West India Company routinely bought slaves in Africa for Caribbean shipment. Even Prussia, then a minor power, grew envious. They formed the Brandenburg African Company to compete but got crushed by the Dutch. This slave trade even triggered an early financial crisis, the South Sea Bubble. It began when Britain's debt-ridden government faced financial crisis. Chief Financial Minister Robert Harley created the South Sea Company, luring public investors. The plan: buy £10 million in government bonds to rescue the treasury. In return, the company gained monopoly rights over American slave, tobacco, sugar trades, including the Caribbean. Plus tax benefits.
To contemporaries, this seemed foolproof, so they stampeded to invest.
Eager buying skyrocketed South Sea stock tenfold within months. Even scientist Isaac Newton invested £20,000, 10 years' salary for him. But markets clearly overvalued the company.
Poor management and brutal American competition made profits fall far below expectations.
In 1720, the bubble burst. Stock prices collapsed, wiping out investors. While they lost money, slaves paid in blood, sweat, and lives. From boarding ships, enslaved Africans embarked on journeys of no return. Slave traders treated them like cargo, heartlessly cramming people into tiny holds where they ate, slept, and relieved themselves, creating filthy air and breeding disease. Many preferred jumping overboard to enduring this torment. To prevent suicides, slave traders shackled them together. Significant numbers died during the voyage. After docking, the enslaved were distributed to plantations across Caribbean islands.
They got little food, worse shelter, often went half naked, yet endured brutal labor. Any hesitation brought punishment. The sick got no care.
Some collapsed while walking and never rose again. The author estimates enslaved people on Caribbean plantations lived just 2 to 3 years on average. The tragedy continued. From 1700 to 1807, Britain trafficked 2.53 million Africans to the Americas. Spain, approximately 2 million. France, approximately 1.14 million. Netherlands, approximately 330,000. Denmark, approximately 83,000 plus. Over 1 million were in the Caribbean alone. European powers exploited African labor to plunder American wealth, unquestionably humanity's darkest chapter. Yet, resistance and change were quietly brewing. This is part 3, Slave Resistance, covering abolitionism, the Haitian Revolution, and American independence wars. Brutal conditions forced constant escapes.
Especially common on islands like British Jamaica with rugged hills and dense jungles.
Escaped slaves fled to remote areas, mingling with surviving indigenous people, living hard but free. They also raided plantations for revenge, provoking colonial retaliation.
Clashes escalated, peaking in the 1730s. Colonists barely suppressed the Maroon Wars, but the enslaved never yielded.
In 1733, a slave rebellion erupted on Danish St. John. Rebels held out 6 months against Danish forces. In 1763, over 4,000 slaves revolted in Dutch Guiana. Dutch authorities took over a year to crush it.
To intimidate slaves, colonists enacted brutal laws. France's Code Noir decreed rebels would have ears cut off.
For a second offense, they'd sever the Achilles tendon. A third rebellion meant execution. Colonists tortured slaves with red-hot branding irons until death. The British were even crueler. They nailed rebels' limbs to the ground with bent wooden stakes, then lit fires burning from limbs to head, making rebels die in agony. Punishments couldn't be harsher, yet rebellions kept erupting. The author notes every Caribbean island had masses of escaped slaves. Every island witnessed uprisings. Their suffering shocked some consciences. In 1757, British Dr. James Ramsay went to work in the West Indies.
Immediately, he found slaves' conditions appalling.
Back in Britain, Ramsay published pamphlets detailing atrocities. Readers were horrified, sparking calls to abolish slave trade, the abolition movement's birth. Starting was tough. 200-plus years of colonialism created entrenched interests. Nobles, capitalists, and middle class had huge American investments. Many were slave-owning planters. Asking them to abandon slavery was like asking tigers for their skin. Plus, mainstream Europe viewed Africans as savage, subhuman. Slavery was seen as their fate, pitiable but unchangeable, granting equal status, unthinkable. So abolition had to progress gradually. Some Europeans freed slaves, persecution of escapees lessened. Some islands let Maroons self-govern if they stopped raiding. Mindsets shifted. The 18th century Enlightenment swept Europe, spreading equality ideals among elites. In 1776, British North America revolted. Revolutionaries declared all men are created equal, with rights to life, liberty, and happiness.
In 1789, the French Revolution erupted. Its Declaration of the Rights of Man proclaimed liberty, equality, fraternity as natural rights.
Frankly, the people mentioned in America's Declaration of Independence and France's Declaration of the Rights of Man didn't include black slaves. Freeing slaves wasn't these revolutions' goal. But when Enlightenment ideas spread widely, awakening more people, their impact would exceed all expectations. The French governor of Saint Dominic noticed enslaved Africans closely followed revolutionary developments. Liberty or equality ideas from France deeply inspired them. Organized by free blacks, some slaves resisted colonists through piecework negotiations and strikes. In August 1791, thousands of slaves revolted in French Saint Dominique. Since Saint Dominique was later renamed Haiti, this uprising became known as the Haitian Revolution. The rebellion's leader, Toussaint Louverture, born free and educated, had read French Enlightenment works and yearned for their vision.
After the revolution began, Toussaint joined with over 1,000 slaves and quickly rose to leadership.
Thanks to Toussaint's exceptional talent and political instincts, French Saint Dominique marched toward independence. This unfolded in 3 phases. Phase 1, October 1791 to February 1794. France's political chaos left colonies neglected, letting Toussaint strike hard at colonists. He even allied with France's enemies, Spain and Britain of the anti-French coalition, against France. Then, radical Jacobins took power in France, abolishing slavery in February 1994. Regarding France's move, Toussaint welcomed it.
But Britain and Spain wouldn't accept this.
They'd supported Toussaint only to weaken France, while fearing revolution itself. Actually, Haiti's revolution ignited slave uprisings across the Caribbean. Colonists were firefighting everywhere. Toussaint's reconciliation with France meant Britain or Spain couldn't use him against France, but had to contain his influence.
Both nations turned their guns. Allies became enemies.
The Haitian Revolution entered Phase 2. British forces advanced north from Jamaica, capturing Saint Dominique's key port, Port-au-Prince. The Spanish troops attacked from Spanish Santo Domingo, surrounding Toussaint's rebels in a critical crisis. Surprisingly, the rebels endured for multiple reasons. First, France repeatedly crushed anti-French coalitions, exhausting Britain and Spain so they couldn't muster enough force against Toussaint.
Secondly, the Haitian Revolution gained massive appeal among black people.
They overcame obstacles to join the uprising, giving rebels numerical superiority. In 1795, Toussaint crippled Spanish forces. Meanwhile, France defeated Spain in Europe, forcing it to cede Spanish Santo Domingo to France. Toussaint then besieged Port-au-Prince, compelling British surrender. In 1799, Napoleon, newly appointed First Consul of France, named Toussaint Commander-in-Chief of Haiti. Toussaint's prestige peaked. The revolution's future seemed bright. But things quickly reversed. In July 1801, Toussaint modeled a constitution after France's revolution, abolishing slavery in Santo Domingo, making himself governor for life. Though Toussaint claimed loyalty to France, Napoleon was furious. He saw this as blatant independence-seeking, unforgivable. Napoleon sent troops to Santo Domingo, captured Toussaint, and imprisoned him in France in 1803. This pioneer of slave liberation died in prison, yet the revolution didn't end, entering Phase 3 toward independence. Santo Domingo, black people had expelled colonists and abolished slavery themselves. They wouldn't accept French rule returning. But Napoleon, meeting colonial support, relied on planters, even tried restoring slavery, deepening conflict. Black people rebelled against French troops, proving the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Britain flipped sides again, blockading ports with its navy, isolating French forces who suffered heavy losses.
Napoleon saw Haiti as a bottomless pit. Needing to focus on Europe, he withdrew troops.
On January 1st, 1804, Santo Domingo declared independence. Black leader Dessalines named the nation Haiti, meaning mountainous land in Taino, becoming the first black slave-founded American nation, a spark igniting a prairie fire.
Haiti's influence first spread to Spain's American colonies. Spain's empire was declining, overwhelmed by growing rebellions. In 1810, rebellion erupted in Spanish Mexico. Revolutionary waves swept Central and Southern America until 1833. Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Argentina all gained independence. The Latin American Wars of Independence. Spain retained only Cuba and Puerto Rico as colonies in the Americas. Spain's fate served as a warning to other powers. To appease public sentiment, Britain abolished the slave trade through legislation, followed by the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, and others. Even Spain eventually declared the slave trade illegal in 1862. U.S. President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation abolishing slavery in the American South. In 1865, the Union won the Civil War, making abolition a reality. Thus ended over 2 centuries of European-led slave trade and slavery. Legally prohibited, slave smuggling continued for some time afterward, but its scale shrank drastically, failing to meet Caribbean labor demands. To fill the gap, European powers turned to Asia. From 1838 to 1918, Britain recruited about 140,000 Indian laborers to the Caribbean, many settling permanently. Nobel laureate V.S. Naipaul was born in Trinidad and Tobago to Indian descendants. Spain recruited over 100,000 Chinese laborers to Cuba, adding new hues to the Caribbean. Civilizations from America, Europe, Africa, and Asia collided and blended here, creating unique Caribbean charm. Here, you'll find Hindu temples beside Christian churches and meet multilingual Caribbean people. As the clock approached the 20th century, would the Caribbean enter a new era? Part 4, Backyard Under America's Shadow, Cold War and Tourist Paradise. I'll reveal the answers. Approaching the 20th century, Caribbean geopolitics transformed again. European powers held islands but weakened significantly, while the rising U.S. viewed the Americas, including the Americans, including the Caribbean, as its backyard, excluding external powers. The U.S. repeatedly warned Europe against meddling in American affairs. The 1898 Spanish-American War saw Spain defeated in Cuba. The Town Law, with U.S. support, Puerto Rico became a commonwealth. What's a commonwealth? Its governor is appointed by the U.S. president, but Puerto Ricans elect legislators and send commissioners to Washington to protect their rights, marking U.S. replacement of Europe as America's hegemon. I think given its proximity to the U.S. and impact on national defense, the Caribbean became a region America felt compelled to fully control. U.S. control relied primarily on political and economic means. Let's examine the political first. During the Spanish-American War, U.S. troops landed in Cuba, helping establish a republican government. The first Cuban president, Tomas Estrada Palma, came to power with U.S. backing. In 1902, the U.S. withdrew, but kept Cuba's southeastern Guantanamo Bay, strategically vital for connecting Caribbean or Atlantic waters, effectively controlling Cuba's maritime access.
Guantanamo remains a U.S. base today. America also intervened in Haiti, citing political chaos, which was indeed real.
Since Haiti's 1807 independence, it's been trapped in ethnic conflicts and military coups with no peace. In 1844, Eastern Haitian factions declared independence, creating the Dominican Republic. Thus, Haiti split into 2 nations, but stability didn't follow. From 1910, Haiti's political strife intensified. 7 presidents in 5 years, each meeting violent ends. In 1915, President Wilson used Haiti's turmoil as pretext to land Marines. U.S. forces seized control of Haiti's power grid, railways, customs, and looted $500,000 in gold from its national bank as debt repayment. The U.S. also intervened in the Dominican Republic, not withdrawing from Haiti until 1934 and the DR until 1940. Now to economic control, U.S. corporations had long coveted Caribbean cash crops. And as U.S. troops entered Cuba and Puerto Rico, businessmen followed, most notably the United Fruit Company. This company started with banana trade, gradually monopolizing Caribbean agriculture. Why bananas? Early 20th century Western consumers craved bananas, causing imports to skyrocket.
Main production was in New Guinea, Oceania, making shipping costly.
United Fruit discovered the Caribbean's hot climate and heavy rainfall were perfect for bananas, so they bought or developed massive plantations, and supplying cheap bananas to U.S. or European markets made United Fruit rich, They later expanded to other fruits or vegetables, eventually absorbing traditional Caribbean crops like tobacco and sugar. It monopolized every step from production to transport to sales, becoming a corporate giant. The result? Caribbean economies became utterly dependent on the U.S., even reduced to vassal states. And in the 1920s, as America surged forward, the Caribbean flourished. But in the 1930s, the Great Depression hit America and Caribbean economies crashed.
What angered Caribbean people was that during boom times, most profits went into American pockets.
Yet when crisis came, Caribbeans bore the cost. Factories and plantations closed, unemployment soared, social conflicts erupted. This plunged ordinary lives into hardship. After 201 began, Britain couldn't maintain colonies, leasing Jamaica, Barbados, etc. to the U.S., strengthening America's grip. America became the sole Western power controlling the region. Caribbean people sought some autonomy.
In 1958, British colonies like Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Tobago formed the West Indies Federation, hoping to unite against U.S. control.
But island differences shattered the Federation. Jamaica went independent first. Trinidad followed. Virgin Cayman Islands became British territories. Becoming America's backyard seemed inevitable, except for Cuba. In early 1959, Castro's revolutionaries overthrew the U.S.-backed Batista regime, establishing revolutionary rule. Initially, the revolutionary government pursued pragmatic policies.
Not seeking conflict, Castro even visited the U.S. informally, telling VP Nixon Cuba wanted friendship and welcomed U.S. investment.
During the Cold War, Castro struck a deal with his arch-rival, the Soviets, agreeing to export 5 million tons of sugar over 5 years in exchange for financial aid, oil and material assistance. Simultaneously, Castro ordered the nationalization of all U.S. investments in Cuba: oil refineries, sugar mills, power plants, railway, hospitals, while expelling tens of thousands linked to the U.S. or Batista's regime after confiscating their property. Cuba thus became the Cold War's front line, nearly triggering nuclear conflict. In October 1962, U.S. spy planes discovered Soviet missile bases in western Cuba. Dozens of medium-range missiles could strike the U.S. mainland, enraging Washington.
On October 22nd, President Kennedy demanded immediate Soviet withdrawal from Cuba, or else.
The Soviets refused outright.
By the 24th, the U.S. deployed a massive fleet, including 8 aircraft carriers, to blockade the Caribbean. Global U.S. forces went on high alert, even preparing nukes, while Soviets entered top combat readiness.
Nuclear war between superpowers was imminent. At the critical moment, the Soviets backed down, agreeing to withdraw all forces from Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended. Ultimately, Cuba became a pawn in the Cold War, gaining little while losing much. Yet, the crisis brought this island unprecedented global attention. Its defiant stance against America resonated worldwide. Castro became a hero to anti-U.S. movements, especially in Latin America. Soccer legend Maradona, who died recently, was his devoted follower. The other leader, Che Guevara, became even more legendary. Born in Argentina, Guevara joined Cuba's revolution and rose to leadership. After the missile crisis, he pursued revolutions across Africa and South America. In 1967, he died in Bolivia. His story became mythologized, transforming into a revolutionary icon. Revered by people globally, Cuba became a thorn in America's backyard, a constant irritant. Meanwhile, other Caribbean nations struggled to escape U.S. influence. For example, when leftist Juan Bosch won the 1962 Dominican election, he then implemented social reforms, including land redistribution. The U.S. saw this as copying Cuba, so they invaded, arrested Bosch, and aborted the reforms.
In 1983, tiny Grenada reformed with Cuba's help. The U.S. invaded to protect citizens, installed a pro-U.S. government, then left.
Even U.S. ally Britain was furious. Grenada was a Commonwealth member, yet America invaded without consulting them. As the book states, late 20th century U.S. interference peaked, all to clean the backyard and prevent another Cuba. But America ignored local governance and welfare. Result? U.S. security improved while the Caribbean drowned in chaos and poverty. Take Haiti. The Duvaliers ruled 30 years, dictatorship at home, pro-U.S. abroad, making Haiti politically and economically dependent.
The United States.
After the Duvaliers fell in 1986, Haiti couldn't maintain basic order. Presidents changed every year or two for 40-plus years. In July 2021, President Moise was shockingly assassinated at home. In such a nation, you can imagine people suffering. 2018 data, Haiti's per capita GDP was $761. 71% lived on under $2 per day, one of Earth's least developed nations. Neighboring Jamaica became a hub for Colombian cartels, close to the U.S. for smuggling. Cartels even formed militias battling Jamaican police. Second question, entering the 21st century, Caribbean economies improved as tourism boomed. Western tourists flooded Caribbean beaches. In 2012, the West Indies had 12 million visitors, plus 17 million bookings. Tiny Bahamas, 320-kilo people, hosted 1.4 million tourists. The Caribbean became a tourist paradise. Tourism, its economic backbone. But this created new problems. Over-specialized industries with low crisis resilience. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic swept the globe, devastating the tourism industry and causing Caribbean governments' revenue to drop by at least 50%, with some countries seeing unemployment rates as high as 60%. Ultimately, except for Cuba, Caribbean nations are heavily dependent on developed countries politically and economically, dooming them to struggle for independent development. The book's author points out that to this day, the Caribbean still faces many problems like ecological issues, drug trafficking, poverty, and political instability, all urgently needing solutions. In the remote, under the shadow of major power politics, the future isn't something the Caribbean can solve alone. Its prospects depend on great power maneuvers and Caribbean nations' own efforts. All right, Empire's Crossroads. From Columbus to today's Caribbean history. We've interpreted it here. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.